is I'm going to start over. Welcome. Si, are you going to get us going, I hope?
Yes. Welcome everyone to the second panel in our series inspired by the 50th anniversary of the Portland Downtown Plan. In that plan, PSU was designated an urban university. Shorthand for an urban university, a university that is in and of its place. A little bit of housekeeping to start. You see, we got some beverages and refreshment. Please take. You're in our remodeled Dersi Moroni Toulan library. It's a work in progress. We still have things to put up on the walls, in our cabinets. The remodeling process, generously funded in significant part by a gift from the Toulan family. It's a beautiful space, and we hope to be hosting events like this, and also it's going to be a student space. I got to give credit again to Sarah Violante in the Dean's office for overseeing this entire remodeling process, which has been just a tremendous effort. These panels are being recorded. Library is going to have access to them. Panel members here, one panel member will be zooming in this time. When we get to questions from the floor and from people who are zooming in, I'm asking panel members to repeat the question before answering it so that the folks who's zooming in can hear the question. That's something we learned. We're managing adaptively in light of our earlier experience. And we've also got a thing going now with the Disability Resource Center to do closed captioning because that didn't work out so well either the first time. So again, we're managing adaptively in light of our experience. So I'm going to introduce the panel moderator, Judith Ramaley, in a moment. She'll introduce other members of the panel. But I want to start and say a couple words about the word co-creation in the title of this session. Co-creating knowledge. I understand that as an elaboration on let knowledge serve the city, which of course is the university motto that former President Judith Ramaley brought to us back in the 1990s. But I learned co-creation from now President Steve Person. So when we were searching for a dean of the College of Urban and Public Affairs, and we got the short list, and Steve was on the short list, I was really excited because Steve had been publishing in the area of co-production. And I was teaching at the time a course called Policy Implementation, and co-production was a big part of that course. And so here was a paper, several papers actually on my reading list, written by someone who's on the short list to be the dean of the College of Urban and Public Affairs. And so I was associate dean, Steve was dean, and he would talk about co-creation. It's not just a one-way transmission of knowledge, it's co-creation of knowledge with our community partners. And so that struck me back then and since as a very important way of understanding what's going on. And of course, community engaged research, which Judith and Steve have been doing for a very, very long time, is a central aspect of what it is to be an urban university. And just another note, the chair of Steve's dissertation committee, Eleanor Ostrom, was a Nobel Prize winner. So that's an interesting distinction as well. Okay, Judith, again, as I'm sure you know, when Judith was president back in the 1990s, that's when initiatives, a whole wide variety of initiatives were undertaken that made Portland State an urban university, really implemented the kinds of things that put us on the national and international stage. An example of the international dimension of things, not that long ago, organized by the chair of our public administration department, Masami Nishishiba. Members of Portland State, Coupa, went to visit Ryokoku University in Japan to try to engage in dialogue with our colleagues at that university about what it means to be a university in and of its place, to be a community engaged university. Ryokoku is about 375 years old. Here we are a whole lot younger than that, but they were learning from us. And much of it was about the kinds of programs that Portland State put in place when Judith was president. And out of that opportunity actually emerged a chapter in a book published in Japanese and English that includes a chapter co-authored by Judith Ramaley and myself. A great honor and privilege for me to be a co-author with Judith. So again, former President Judith Ramaley, now member of Board of Trustees at Portland State, member of the search committee as we look for a new Portland State president. So Judith, please introduce your colleagues on the panel and take it from there.
I will. To set the stage, we actually have in the audience Ethan Seltzer. I've not met Emerita Nightingale, so I don't know if she's here, but good. The authors of the very thoughtful article that set the stage for all 6 of these sessions said it beautifully. The economic, cultural, and social center of a dynamic region, and we became an international icon, as I said. But what they said in the urban university idea is much of the plan put forth a vision for a public, pedestrian-scaled, multi-purpose, and vital downtown, able to contribute profoundly to the well-being of the entire city and the region. We're in a new time of renewal, brought about by everything we've learned from the pandemic. And what we will talk about at this panel today is the extraordinary resources that we bring to that task. The educational experience we offer people of all ages, our capacity to respond to the changing needs, how we can adapt our approaches to community engagement and co-creation to match not only our own ability, but that of the community, which is considerable. Our approach to scholarship and research, and the challenges of urban renewal. So let me introduce you to an absolutely stellar panel. So I'm going to introduce them in the order that they will speak. So keep track of this for those of you who don't remember when you're speaking. Our first speaker will be Jennifer Dill, Professor of Urban Studies and Planning and Director of the Transportation Research and Education Center, or HRAC. She does research on transportation decision-making, how those inform policy and practice, and her recent projects focus on a number of things: travel behavior, bicycling, shared mobility, transit-oriented developments, and health. I may have missed something, but I did the best I could. Okay. The second person is Marisa Zapata, who is, I hope she's on the screen now. Good. Marisa is Associate Professor of Land Use Planning and Director of our Homelessness Research and Action Collaborative, HRAC. Dr. Zapata conducts research on the impact of deeply embedded cultural differences on how land is used, how planners prepare places to act in the face of uncertainty, and how government and civil society can cooperate, especially in planning for an uncertain future as our diversity continues to grow. Our third presenter is Sergio Pellegroni. Did I get close?
Very good.
I've been practicing how to pronounce his first name. Professor and Senior Fellow of the Institute for Sustainable Solutions, so a close partner of Marisa's, and Director of the Center for Public Interest Design, CPID.
Yeah.
Why?
Unfortunately.
Why? In the School of Architecture, and a founding member of the federally funded Green Building Research Lab. He is also a co-founder of HRAC. Then we have Mary Ashwald, Associate Research Professor at the Regional Research Institute in the School of Social Work. The Institute upholds principles of partnership and engagement, leading change, social and economic justice, interdisciplinary rigor, and community-based participatory action forms of research and protocols. She herself studies interpersonal violence against people with disabilities, houselessness and homelessness, disability justice, and advocacy. And finally, we are blessed today with the presence of President Stephen Percy, who, as you heard from Sai, has dedicated his career to fostering vibrant communities between universities and the communities they serve. He's an expert in public policy, administrative ethics, urban politics, and he is known for his ability to advance civic engagement and create innovative solutions by linking the skills and capacities of universities to the knowledge and energy of communities. He believes strongly, and has throughout his career, in using collaborative, interdisciplinary applied research to facilitate university community partnerships that can solve problems and improve the quality of life for all of us. So with that, we have a panel that you would want to have. It's right here. Let us begin.
All right, thank you very much, Judith. I'm pleased to be here again. My name is Jennifer Dill, and as Judith mentioned, I am the director of HRAC, the Transportation Research and Education Center at PSU. So Sergio, if you want help on acronyms, come to the transportation people, because that's all we do, acronyms. I do a lot of them. So anyway, HRAC is an interdisciplinary campus-wide center here at Portland State University. We are housed in the Office of Research and Graduate Studies. And we support collaborative research and education programs for faculty, community members, students, and other partners throughout the city and beyond. We are home to a federally funded through the U.S. Department of Transportation center called the National Institute for Transportation and Communities, NITC, another acronym. Also, our Initiative for Bicycle and Pedestrian Innovation. We house some public data archives on transportation and a number of other transportation projects and programs in that center. And I would say key to all of that, and why I believe I was invited to be on this panel, is that engagement with community partners has really been central to all of our work. And I'm first going to provide some examples of that, a full range, and then talk about some of the themes that I think connects a lot of that work, and that sort of connects with some of the other examples that you'll hear here. So first of all, as our name implies, research is a big part of our activities. And not just me personally, but we have about a dozen faculty throughout campus that do a large share of their work is focused on transportation, multimodal transportation. And some of these, we often are partnering formally with different agencies, City of Portland, the Bureau of Transportation, Metro, Oregon Department of Transportation, TriMet, many other agencies, and increasingly partnering with nonprofit community groups and non-governmental organizations. To give you a few examples, one of the earliest ones that we like to point to actually happened in the 1990s before I arrived here, and it was led by my now retired colleague, Jim Strathman. Any of you who ride TriMet here in Portland, particularly on the buses, every time you get on that bus, there's a little beam of something that is counting when you get off and when you get on and when you get off. And there's GPS on that bus that many of us use to figure out when the bus is coming. And today we're all used to that. That's normal. You may not know you're being counted, but the GPS, that's normal. Back in the 1990s, that was not done on any transit system in the US. TriMet was interested in using that and partnered with PSU to demonstrate that it would be accurate way of doing counts as opposed to having people standing on the buses and counting, and much more laborious. And so with that research, sort of paved the way for transit agencies across the country to use that same technology, and now it's everywhere. But again, tested here. Moving forward to around 2008 or so, those of you who have lived in Portland that long or in the area may recollect when Sam Adams was mayor, there were two fatalities of bicyclists who were hit by large vehicles turning right next to a bike lane. They happened within a few months of each other. And the mayor asked his staff, what do we do about this problem? And the answer that came from their engineers was a sort of a technology from Europe called a bike box, a green bike box, which if you've been in Portland, you've probably seen these all over the place. But at the time, that was actually not allowed by federal regulations to put that on a street in the US. And so the city of Portland, in order to implement these, because they thought it would be the right solution, needed to formally experiment and request approval from the federal government to experiment with this. And that involves doing an evaluation. And so they partnered with us, Chris Monsieur, my colleague in civil engineering, and myself, to do that rigorous formal evaluation. And as a result, those bike boxes are now on their way. The federal government is slow, but we provided the evidence that yes, they can improve safety, and you see them all over Portland and many other cities now. There's other examples like that. The protected bike lane on Southwest Broadway that goes right through the Portland campus. Again, the first type of that infrastructure in the city of Portland. There's a little bit of pushback from downtown business groups about that because it did take away a motor vehicle lane of traffic, of car traffic. And so we partnered to do the evaluation of that and some other bike lanes that were installed downtown to show that no, it didn't actually increase congestion. And actually both motor vehicle drivers and bicyclists actually appreciated that additional separation. There's other examples. More recently, we did some evaluation of the red bus lanes showing up in Portland, because believe it or not, that also is not a federally approved thing. The federal government is very rigid about paint going on pavement. And we partnered, some of my colleagues in urban studies and planning have partnered to look at the potential impacts of new transit infrastructure, either like bus rapid transit on Powell Boulevard or the new light rail in the Southwest Corridor, and the potential that those types of investments could potentially spur gentrification and displacement. And so working with community partners to see how you might prevent that and sort of estimate what are the threats from that. All of these projects involve students in collecting data, analyzing it, etc. It provided them experiences, really hands-on applied research, meeting with agency staff. Often it may be turned into a thesis, a journal article, a conference presentation that helps their career. And the faculty involved are also benefiting through our peer review and publishing and all the things that we get credit for. A second example, I mentioned data. We have a couple open data sources of transportation data that those are partnerships with the Oregon Department of Transportation, Metro, and other public agencies. And again, that's in the spirit of providing data to everyone to use. And then thirdly, we offer professional development courses. Portland is doing a lot of innovative things, particularly around transportation, bicycling, and pedestrians. And so every year we host a number of workshops where professionals from all over the country, all over North America, come to learn about what Portland is doing. And again, those agency partners and staff help teach those courses or be guest speakers. And nearly 750 professionals have participated in that, in addition to 100 faculty from throughout North America have come to learn how to teach these things, and they go back to their campuses. Related to that, since 2016, we do a summer camp for high school students to learn about transportation, get them engaged and interested in STEM related careers. We've had 177 high school students come through that program in the past 6 years. We also started by actually Commissioner Earl Blumenauer, now Congressman Earl Blumenauer. We offer partnering with the city of Portland, a class called Portland Transportation and Traffic that is primarily there to engage community partners to learn about the transportation system and how it works so that they can engage more effectively. And then finally, we bring that engagement into the classroom. And I think the best example of that is something that we now have branded the Better Block program. Those of you who have gone along NATO Parkway in the past few months have noticed a big new piece of infrastructure, protected bike lane, painted green along that. That started out many years ago as just a pop-up temporary bike lane when there were events on Waterfront Park. That was a student project. So there were engineering and planning students at PSU who helped design that and test it out and evaluate it the first time, and now it is a piece of infrastructure. That program continues, and recently a group of students through that sequence of courses designed a bike lane around in Hood River near a middle school that just got funding from ODOT and will be implemented. And so we're really proud of that engagement. And just quickly some themes that I think pull this all together. Is that these partnerships have really only happened because the public agencies in the region are doing really innovative, cutting edge work that makes for juicy research to attract researchers to do it. And they're willing to try things out, to test it, to evaluate it, and that they want to partner with the university to do an objective, hands-off evaluation and produce the results, good or bad, and learn from those results in their future implementation.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Okay.
Nicely set the stage. I suggest we listen to all of the panelists, and then we'll have them interact with each other a bit. And then it's yours to ask any questions you want. So, Marisa, are you ready to tell us your story?
I am, but can you remind me? Hold on one second, I'm getting an echo.
What?
Marisa, we could hear you originally, and now we can't anymore.
Yeah, I've got an echo for some reason. Coming back in my own head.
What?
But I have survived this before. So I will just talk and pretend I can't hear myself. All right, so Judith, can you remind me how much time I have?
About 7 minutes or so,
7 minutes?
max.
Okay, cool. All right, so I am Marisa Zapata, and I run the Portland State University Homelessness Research and Action Collaborative, working with community, hand in hand for community, on behalf of community, is a fundamental value for our center. It's been a guiding value for me since I joined academia. If people want to hear more about my journey, we can talk about it later. But I think that it's important to note that Portland State is a space that work has been celebrated, and it gives us the space to actually talk about this work in a very meaningful, academic, scholarly way. The center was founded 4 or 5 years ago, so we're still pretty early in the life cycle of the center. We very deliberately chose to have the word collaborative in it and to have research and action. And I think that, what Jennifer was highlighting, Jennifer and I are down the hall from each other. We're both in our studies and planning. And if you listen to both of us talk about engaged research, we have very different approaches to what that looks like. And so within our field, we like to distinguish between qualitative research, engaged research, and applied research. And what does it mean to be doing applied research? What does it mean to be actually doing community engaged research? And what does it mean that you're just like talking to human beings and doing some research? And in practice, a lot of those things get mingled together. And so for most of us who are involved in the center, we're pretty centered on these ideas of engagement as a research activity with and hand in hand in community. Although we certainly also do applied research, which I think is similar to a lot of what Jennifer had been talking about. We came together on some fundamental values of wanting to really try to listen to and work on behalf of impacted communities. We're going to talk later about some of the barriers to doing that. We were committed to trying to address and speak to racial equity and the importance of that work. And these things are hard to do in practice, but we really tried to bring them in through various specific programs. I think that our first act of creating the center was, I think, maybe the most profound demonstration of our commitment to community. When I received a phone call from someone who may or may not be on this panel, telling me that there was interest in putting a homelessness research center together at the time, and that there were certain people who were very interested in that, who may not have had community in a very broad sense of the term of anyone who is working in homelessness. front and center in their hearts and minds, I recognized that there was a chance for people through PSU to create a center that would do harm. And not just to the work that many of us had done, but to actually perpetuate positions and viewpoints that could in the end do harm to people experiencing homelessness. And so when I met people who were interested in starting the center, we talked about these issues panoply. And we agreed from the jump that if we were put under intense pressure to abandon our commitment to advancing the knowledge that proves what ends homelessness is housing, or to take on contracts for affluent and powerful people, that we would simply close the center. And I'm not sure I can think of anything else as powerful as saying, like, this is how we found it and how we started. I certainly was not looking to be a research center director and launch a center the first year after I got tenure. So from that, we really tried to balance that commitment and that vision for the kind of projects that we've been wanting to take on. So if you check out our website, I can put it in the chat later. You can check out some great projects that we're looking at. Portland Street Response, that was a project that was driven by and wanted by people in community who were have lived experience with homelessness and advocates on behalf of people who have lived experience of homelessness. That's an alternative policing program that is dispatching people who can actually respond in crisis management as opposed to traditional policing mechanisms. We have a project that we call the Villages Project. It's a how-to guide to develop a village model for alternative shelter. And very powerful project that was rooted in the practices of our architects who have been working with community to help build this model. We've got work that we did during COVID with activist groups and mutual aid groups to help get out a rapid survey to people experiencing homelessness to find out where did they want to go in the face of COVID? Where was a safe space for them to live? And that brought along the evidence of the importance of thinking about motels as alternative spaces. One of the projects that I'm probably most proud of being able to nurture and support is the Afro Village. And that was an idea by Laquita Lamford, who's a community activist and health worker. She is Black, and she had a vision of how alternative shelter village models could in fact serve people who were Black. One of our concerns around the village models that have been implemented to date were that most of them were serving people who were white. And within our marginalized communities, we also know that there are people who are more vulnerable. And that's the case with most people of color, particularly African Americans and Native Americans. And so the opportunity to keep that work alive while we were doing this other village work was extremely important for us in trying to live and demonstrate how to create and share these values. Then we have, like, on another side, funded research that comes from government, where you've got partners that we're trying to be subversive and put in the stuff that we know community wants, but also asking the questions the government wants and the way that they want it. We've done evaluations of permanent supportive housing projects. We've done work with the Bureau of Environmental Sustainability here in Portland, where we're looking at how these public agencies that are now managing public land with people experiencing homelessness living on them, how they can actually respond in a human, affirming way while also meeting the needs of their agencies. And I would be remiss if I did not share that we are now on our third transportation project, working with members from HRAC. All three are national projects where we are talking about these issues for public agencies where people experiencing homelessness are now living on land through transit agencies, airports, and coming up next, highways. So I'm happy to talk more about our values, our core initiative areas, but I think that's my 7 minutes.
That's impressive, Marisa. You were 7 minutes and 10 seconds. That was amazing. Wow. Sergio, your turn.
So Sergio Pallaroni, Director at Center for Public Interest Design here at Portland State. I'm going to comment that we wish we had a U in our name so that it could be Cupid rather than Sipid. It's been suggested to us by one of our colleagues that we should just go for it. But anyway, so I direct a center which is, at the time of its creation, was unique in North America because the field of public interest design had emerged, but really hadn't found a home in academia nationally. And in my first 2 decades in teaching at University of Washington, University of Texas, to schools that were committed to change, they never took the step to create the center. So I have to thank PSU for making it possible. And the center has actually focused on really kind of building the field of public interest design, because as opposed to, and I'm surrounded by fabulous researchers, and in a building built in a culture of research, I have to say that architecture hasn't had that kind of trajectory, except for in sustainability, some of the empirical things that back our design process. And it has been actually built that kind of as an exclusionary practice built on the kind of where the financing came from rather than where the need lay. So we have had a kind of situation where in 1993, a very important report came out from the American Institute of Architects, looking at North American condition and saying, well, we basically serve a little less than 4% of the need nationally, or 4% of the population. So what happens to the other 96 or 95% of the population? So public interest design, or the way we framed it in the center, is forget the 4%. How do we address the 96%? And to create that, then we had to create a kind of a body of knowledge. And how do you create a body of knowledge when there isn't a research culture? So what we did is we just went out to the field to everybody who had been practicing or attempting to practice in the field of public interest design. And we were lucky to get, in what surprised us, the support of the fellows of the American Institute of Architects, the grand old figures at the top of the whole thing. And through their kind of generational prize called the Latrobe Prize. And from it, it allowed it finances for 2 years to look at practices, not just in the United States, but throughout the world, to begin to look at how they were actually practicing public interest design, and how were they taking the lessons they were getting from the field and applying it to need in each community, and how were they, importantly, identifying needs and making sense of it in terms of the perspective of architecture. And so we wrote a book, a report which has now been widely distributed, Wisdom from the Field, Public Interest Design and Practice, just as a kind of perspective on 110 practices. You can go into the pages, there's 17,000 pages of written research in it, too much. But the discussion that came out began to identify that it's some important things. And one is that the kind of regionality of public interest design practices, as opposed to kind of generalizations that have driven our field, we are finding that what was successful practices were based on the need of the local conditions. And this was kind of transformative for our field. And we decided that that would be one of the kind of assumptions behind the Center for Public Interest Design, that we would not just take the assumptions that we have made nationally or internationally about how architecture is practiced, but look at the communities in need that we were hoping to address, the need that we saw in a community, and then construct practices based on deep conversations in kind of the lived experience of these communities. So that has actually led us to a range of projects. Marisa just talked about the homeless research. We are there, we're partners and co-founder, 2 of us at the center. And basically we started to work with the village model, which had basically emerged from the houseless community, the unhoused community in Portland in the region. And they had formed villages as a kind of structure to address the fact that there was no social mechanisms or state mechanism or anything to create stability, protection, security, and all the other things that one needs to have to survive in this culture or in this country. So this model created a kind of deep democracy, of which I highly respect. And they started to institute it in this city. And in this city emerged one of the first, important villages in that model. And they asked us, they reached out to the center because we had gone out early to study them. They said, okay, I think you're headed in the right direction. Can you help us expand the village model? And he says, our big barrier of entry is that the city has just declared, and this day has declared a housing emergency, but they haven't included us in the conversation. So we did the simple thing of inviting all the large firms in town, and we sat them down at Mercy Corps, 300 people and clients who were houseless, and we sat down and tried to figure out how could we make this a model that could be instituted. And then we ambushed the mayor and invited him to the final review. And at the end, not just houseless community members who did not have a vote, in a normative sense, but actually the heads of all these firms throughout the city asked, well, what are you going to do about it? And out of that came support for a model of villages that now we're in our 8th village in the region supporting it. With Catholic Relief Service, with an incredible cast of supporters. So in a way, what we've done is not only kind of gone to the people, but then try to think systemically. Think, how do we create systemic solutions which not only don't look at, okay, here's a series of small houses that address this problem, but where does the financing come? Who does the supportive services? How does it empower the people? What rights do they have? Look at it comprehensively. So I think that this has happened now thanks to President Percy's support here with with Indigenous Studies. So we're looking at restoring in the middle of this city, the incredible creation of a oak savanna, which was an incredible innovation by the First Nations of the country, just in this valley, an incredible ecosystem that has been forgotten and never in the discussion of how we move sustainably forward. And yet we're going to try to recreate this and wire in multiple disciplines of students so they can participate in thinking about, one, the restoration of it, but secondly, how does this become part of the solution for our future? So that deep conversation, that changing the logic of how we address, coming up with new protocols and practices to create a new practice of architecture, and then finally creating the first degree in public design, graduate degree in public design in the Americas has been kind of the stream of our approach. That's it.
Wonderful. Oh, how long? Just 7 minutes and 22 seconds.
Marisa, you beat.
We have precision here. I'm impressed. Oh my, Mary.
Thank you, everybody, for going ahead, and thank you for being here. Mary Oshwald, Director of the Regional Research Institute for Human Services, which is housed within the School of Social Work. The RRI is almost 50 years old, which is amazing to me. A little bit of the backstory and then who I think our community partners are. I think there was 10 research centers started 50 years ago across the country, and we're the ones that are still sort of existing and thriving. And I asked the director, the first director and sort of the instigator of it, why are we still here? And he said 3 things. You have to have community partners. You have to be part of your community. You have to be of your community and serving your community. You have to let the researchers do what they're going to do, and you have to connect with students because you're at a university campus. And you have to have, sort of the blessing from leadership, both for doing the work, having trust in the workers, and that kind of backing, that institutional back of the house support that is just moving research forward. So you have to have the front players in the back of the house, and that, being at an institute of higher education, my love of why I'm here, and I think why many of us are here doing our clinical work, our training, our research, is that we have access to students. And I think every one of us could think about who in our academic careers, in our personal kind of exploratory options of our life, we have mentors. and we've been mentees, and we've been mentors. So this idea that we sort of pass on knowledge through the generations, and we have students in classrooms, we have students out in the community as apprentice workers, as internship workers, as practicum placements. I think every department or school on this campus has some kind of connection with students out in the community. It could be right in your department. It could be engaged learning. Got the lights going on. Is it fire alarm? No.
No.
Okay, good. Don't worry about that. So I think when we think about community engaged research, we've got certainly the public entities that come knocking on our door, send us an email and say, could you please help us with this? And then we go out into the campus and we have students who want to do this, who ask me questions of why are you doing what you're doing when we've been doing it for so long? That's like, oh, we have to talk about our values, our history, our mission from people who are very curious and want to do data cleaning, want to do focus groups, want to do interviews. And I love their energy for the next generation, that we can leave these rooms in 10, 5, 15 years. And I've got super good hope that what our work has started will either leave, because that's what needs to happen as the city grows and matures, or it just gets better. And I think for Portland being a member of Oregon, and we're also a member of the Northwest region and the country. So I think when we think about how are we as an urban entity, we support other urban entities, but we also think about rural and frontier areas that connect with what it means to be living in community, when those communities can be pretty different depending on the geographical place. And then just one final thing, you know, we're just living still in this pandemic and all of the lessons we've learned from COVID, still learning because of COVID, and the upping of access to each other. We've got people here, we've got people on the screen. I would have to say our research partners within research and graduate studies and HR did great work of thinking about what are the ethical dilemmas when you have to access people who maybe are at their home and you may not want to have a private conversation with somebody in your household. All of these things, I just have to say super thanks to PSU's thinking about how to do research, because it didn't slow down really in COVID at all. And which was, I'm just grateful. And I don't want to lose what we've learned about access and sustainability by technology. And we have to get technology sort of equally across this city. So thinking about how am I going to contact my therapist online when I don't have stable internet? Or how am I going to access research partners or students in remote classrooms when that infrastructure has to be there? So that's not my bailiwick, but I certainly understand when connecting with partners, students, research experts, that just lots of learning still to remember and move forward for infrastructure. That's it, Judith.
That's just the beginning.
I know, just the
So
beginning.
there will be more.
Thank you.
Steve, wrap us up.
Well, Dr. Ramaley, Moderator Ramaley, I think you probably share with me the pride of hearing this great work that
God,
these
yes.
people are doing. And they are wonderful representatives of that work and the variety of that work. But there's a lot more folks too.
Mhm.
And so that makes me proud of Portland State. I will tell you as president, when you go around the country, if you start talking, if you say you're from Portland State, the most prominent thing we are known for is university community engagement. We've got some other great stuff and great researchers, but we have that kind of respect and attention around the country. And so as we do this work, even internationally. So as I mentioned, so I'm going to speak a little bit about kind of how you support this work as a university leader and what it means for the future. When I look around, and I've been around on 3 different campuses with a lot of community engagement, one of the things I learned when people started paying attention is they say, well, who's controlling all this and who's monitoring this and who's inventorying this and how do we know what's going on? Maybe we need to centralize it. And I always say, no. The energy comes from these centers, from the faculty members and their classes and their relationships with partners. Some of these are as small as one faculty member working in one organization to multiple faculty and multiple partnerships to these centers of major work that are connecting in many different ways. And so I always resist any, and I did this once when I first went in, I tried to inventory it and I realized as soon as you did it, it was out of date. You could never get people to give you all the data. And it was just, I wasn't getting anywhere. I was not advancing the state of the art in the world by trying to inventory. But what do I think of as a community leader? I think that the role of the university in this work is largely to bring value added to the work that's being done across the campus. We don't need to track it. We don't need to control it. We don't need to understand it all, but we need to be supportive of it in the way we approach things. And so I see different ways that are particularly taking this work to the next level. I've been thinking a lot about the next iteration of this. We've been at this like 30 years, Judith, maybe 27, maybe 33. Extension services were doing some of this work much longer than that, but it's sort of universities sort of picking this up, adding it to their mission, taking it seriously, doing important work. Is about 30 years old. And I think it's kind of a useful reflection point. So as I look at universities moving forward and what leadership can sort of bring to the table, I would say the following. One is extending pathways from the community into the university. We are rather unique in somewhat insulated institutions in higher education, as much as we reach out, as much as the work we do. When I was at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, we were trying to grow our engagement. We said, you know, we got to have one 800 line for people to call the university. This is a little before a lot of social media. I'm dating myself. But then we found we already had 60 800 lines. So that wasn't going to be the answer. So one of the things you figure out is how do you make sure your door is open to a wide variety of people? Not people just who know how to navigate systems, but people who don't quite understand that, but sure would like to talk to somebody, sure have an idea, and sure would like to make a connection. And that can come from individuals, from organizations and nonprofits and other people that try to figure that out. So that's one thing I think we need to work on. Second, I think there are times when major opportunities come forth where the university can be a major partner, bigger than any center, bigger than any faculty member or academic unit. They're all great, they may be part of it. But I am seeing right now what I think is a pretty major opportunity for Portland State. In the current last 6 months, I've been involved in lots of conversations about workforce needs. Employers don't have workers. What's the future of work? We got artificial intelligence. What are we going to do that? But there's been a lot of conversations, more than I remember my career, about workforce, how to create it, develop it, support it, because it's the future of our economic activity. It's the future of social mobility, and it's a lot of very important impacts of that work. Increasingly, there are opportunities, I think, for universities to be recognized much more directly in that work. And so as we're looking at opportunities and talking to people, you may hear about some of this. This is sort of a campus level leadership can help make the connections and then bring in the rest of the university parts that fit into it. So that's another thing. Semiconductors. The many people in the state got very concerned about the semiconductor industry and the $10 billion investment in Ohio and our major Intel facility here and some superconductor production here, but also the intellectual scientific and research development. What are we going to do about that? I was so pleased when they created a group of people to look at the issues that were seen as important in strengthening the state's competitiveness in semiconductors, which, as you know, is this major $1 billion CHIP Act out there coming along. How do you do that? One of the planks they put in was universities. And one of the things we found in that was not only did they want the scientists, the researchers, the PhDs going into that work, they have huge needs in workforce of many different types. And so there's another opportunity. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, but leadership can help have surveillance to find those opportunities, get us involved and bring the right parts of the university to that. Third, I think one of the things that helps promote the long-term sustainability of engagement is weaving engagement into the other major missions of the institution. You've heard so many times about today in this panel about instruction, how students are involved, getting involved with students, getting involved in academic programs, that richness, that community-based learning, that service learning, that experiential learning, that growing and participating with community in co-creating knowledge is one of the most beautiful parts of this work. And so I think that that's something that is very important, and we're doing a lot of that. as this university. Second is embracing racial justice and equity. This work can definitely play a part to that if we organize it and make sure we're open to that kind of thing. So several have been working on that. I'm not trying to say that we have been, but we could be even more purposeful about connecting engagement to racial justice and equity on our campus, but also in our community, which is all many people trying to find new ways to approach that. So connecting the engagement to other missions is not that hard, but I think it's important to do, and it brings some strength to it. Another thing is that I've been very interested in is supporting assessment of the work. And many times we've done the research and we haven't always assessed the impact. Organizations and centers and projects like you hear really probably have some pretty good assessment, but we're not always assessing all our work. Where is the impact? We do know one area of assessment is that students who are engaged in community-based learning activities tend to have better learning outcomes. They do better in their classes and they graduate. But other than that, we don't know an awful lot about that. How are we going to improve the practice if we don't assess ourselves? How are we going to understand the reciprocity of the benefits created if we don't look at that? How do we know that the university may benefit more than a community-based organization? How are we understanding that reciprocity? If we're co-creating, we should be co-benefiting, and we need to look at it. So assessment's another area that we've been thinking about. I'm worried and interested to make sure we keep the next generation of these good folks and engagement and many others, that we're continuing to bring people into that work, and that we have a campus whose culture and values support engagement. That's not consistent everywhere, but how do we make sure this is counted, is valued, and is seen as an important part of the mission of the institution? So those are some of the major things that I've been thinking about doing the work. I just want to say a few things we're doing at Portland State. Have we got it all figured out? No, I'm always humble in this work, but I want to say some things we're doing. In terms of assessment, we created, by an earlier effort to look at engagement at PSU about 5 years ago, something called the Community Engagement Research Academy, SARA. The purpose of that organization is to provide small grants to faculty and staff who want to look at engagement but understand the impact of it. So we created a small unit. It's more virtual. You won't be able to go and find the office with 6 people in it. And Judith has been instrumental in helping to organize it. But we provide small grants and other learning opportunities for people to come together and look at that. And I'll tell you a little funny story about why it's called Academy. Because in higher ed, if you say you're going to create a center or you're going to create an institute, it creates all kinds of issues and legal and considerations and other things. I thought, this is not going to be a place where there are 25 people working. This is going to be a very small affair. So I use the word academy because that's a lexicon that I have more ability to be functional. But don't tell anybody I told you that. We've done something new in university relations. That's the unit on the campus that's very involved in the external connectivity. Traditionally, external government relations or university relations work with state government legislators and the governor and people who fund us, sometimes who regulate us. We also work with city government, and all that's important, but that's missing a lot if we don't do that. So we have created something called the Community Impact Unit within university relations, but all it is more people or reassigning some positions of responsibility. So now we have one person that's focused on community, nonprofit community, community, grassroots community, communities of color. The second person working on the civic connectivity, because there's a lot of advantages of working city government, regional government, county government, state government, all the variety of agencies within that. And then so working with those agencies and also working with the business sector, the corporate sector. There can be a variety of opportunities for that as well, that can also bring student learning, experiential learning, and other things. So we're trying to do that. So that's something we've done kind of structurally ourselves to try to reposition. So we have more folks out there, but always their work is to again find the information opportunity and bring it back to us. They're not going to do it, but they give more ways for people to find their way to the institution. I created this year something called the President's Council on Community Engagement and Impact. And this was an effort to bring our community to work with us as we think about engagement. I've always kind of struggled with that. If you do it wrong, it's like an advisory committee that you call together, you say all the good things we're doing, and they say, well, isn't that nice? And then at the end of the day, say, why did you bother? I'm not contributing here. Or you don't want somebody to come in to say, this is 18 things you should start doing. But we recreated this with some really good thoughtfulness of community leaders. So this is composed of, this council is composed of faculty, students, some researchers, and community representatives that came together to think about the university and what we're working on. So we've had two good meetings, out of which they've already started creating projects together. One's in workforce. I mean, it's just really interesting to see the group together. But all this is bringing the richness together, the space for the dialogue, coming together to work. So that's another thing we've done. We're right now going through the Carnegie classification for university community engagement. Some of you know about that. We were an early leader of that. We got it the second round and we're doing the third round, but we're purposely taking that opportunity, not just to fill out the forms, not just to gather the information, not just to send it and get the label of engaged institution, but instead to reflect on what we're doing and what we've learned from that and how we can deepen it and grow it and assess it. So we're trying to use that at the same time. Finally, another thing that I think universities leadership can do is help the logistical problems of policy and practice that goes on in creating these partnerships. The issues of risk management, contracting, getting through HR sorts of things, all very important. But sometimes we're casting a new category, we're creating a new category of employee or community partner as a paid relationship. As a consultant, how do you do that? So trying to figure out and work with the units that are doing the good work, say, where are the problems and obstacles you have? Can we help at a campus level to smooth that out and make it easier? So those are some of the things we're working on. And Judith, with that, I'd love to have a conversation and hear more from these great folks doing this great work.
Wonderful. Basically, this panel has created a handbook on how to do engagement in the world we're in now. So what would you like to ask each other about this? And at the end, I can't resist telling you what's in the handbook. No. What would you like to know from each other? What ideas sparked in your mind because of what people said?
Okay. I'm intrigued at the diversity of approaches that people come to this work. I think they're all valid, they're all useful, very interesting, but sort of how you come to the work, what are your guiding principles, what are your funding sources, who are your partners, and it's all, I've heard a lot of wonderfulness here, some diversity in that, and I think that'd be very interesting as you begin to peel apart all these different layers of engagement types. You've got some really interesting differences that are all very relevant to that. So that intrigued
Me too. If you don't have questions, I do. I'm really interested in every one of you, not necessarily directly, but indirectly, as talk about how your approach has changed as you come deeper into the issues that you care most about. Hello. And Marisa, I can't see you. I don't know when you want to speak. Can we figure out a way? Because I know you'll have things to add. So if there's some way that you could let me know if the hand goes up or something. But each one of you has shifted, has developed different approaches as your thinking has gone deeper. What has that been like? What triggered it? Because community engagement is now considerably different from it was when I was happily independent our motto. And in those days, it was servant learning, it was projects with individual partners. Now it's this complex, beautiful web of relationships and voices and stories. What happened? And what can be done? I think Steve, you did a beautiful job of explaining how we can support it. But what made it emerge?
Okay, I'll
Go
start.
for it.
I'll
Go
start.
for
So one of the things I think for me, I'm kind of so being in the built environment is, it has these big implications because a lot of the economic activity of every country goes into the built environment, you know, and but in the United States, we've had a retreat of the federal government and states from serving communities. And, you know, operating in my field in a country, in the only developed country in the world that has no public housing, you know, investment, you know, other than housing vouchers, is a kind of gap. I mean, we're seeing it in our streets. There's no safety net to do that, and it's only getting worse. And investment in multiple things that for investment. So we started out as a kind of advocacy for the people who are in the streets. You know, we started in Mexico actually working with women in informal settlements. You know, essentially houseless people, but brought it here, and then so we started this advocacy side, but recently in the last decade, we've increasingly moved to beginning to look at things like what developers are willing to be long-term investors in housing that would tip the things and would catch people. If we can put them in a village, what's the next step? You know, if the state isn't there, and how do we get developers to change the economic model so that they will pick them up the next step and hope, you know, and create communities that will support them as they reintegrate themselves back into communities and become, you know, realize their lives and become more involved once again, and, you know, have the opportunities to keep more involved. So I think that shift to broadening our ability to have more it's led to a need to have more complex discussions, because you're no longer talking in the role of advocacy or, you know, going to the people who are most impacted, but then sitting down and curating a discussion and getting people to sit at the table and beginning to find a common ground for development through. And that's actually, I mean, in my field, in my area, becoming the big, you know, one of the big impacts. I think part of what's kind of helping to get there is actually sustainability. I mean, I started out in this field. I'm from South America, and I grew up in Patagonia, and you know, I'm surrounded by native people, and so we thought, you know, sustainability only served the rich. You know, it was like a toy of the rich people. So I started out with a kind of the mantra that I wanted sustainability to be available to the poor, you know, because they needed it more than the rich. They needed to continue to live sustainable lives like they had led for a long time. Now I'm finding the sustainability, the fact that people are becoming increasingly aware that the planet is shrinking and we cannot avoid each other. That's driving us to the table. And I'm being predatory. I'm using whatever it will take to get people to sit down, to get the consensus and begin to take the next steps, you know. And so, but I mean, you know, always in advocacy that the people without a voice gets heard, and we're informing and representing them, but we need the other half of the people to be there, you know, to be able to make the connection, to make change permanent. Otherwise, you know, we fall into the pit of a traditional university where we can radicalize ourselves, but we can't do anything to, you know, effectively change. So,
Consider yourself hugged. Okay.
And I'll just add to that, like, who's at the table, and I love the idea that we can have, you know, us here in person, and what I had said earlier is that remote access to each other as well, I think is super important. Giving the tools for folks to use their voice in the way that is most comfortable and most safe for them. And that we just stop talking and listen. Yeah. That real engaged listening that takes time, takes relationship, building back trust where we have broken it. Over the decades, research has been dismissive, for sure, of communities, has been tyrants of communities, and correcting the wrongs and understanding what it means to be a university person in that stage, in that place of power, and being as much as possible humble around that when we either invite ourselves into the communities we invite here, we meet on neutral ground, wherever that table is, being creative with that table and how we listen to those voices, I think is something I've been thinking about for sure.
Yeah, I'll add, I think your question was how has our approach changed? And I would say on the transportation side, how one way it's changed is trying to scale up a little bit, and then also at the same time trying to institutionalize things, meaning how do we sustain it over time? So how do we have the infrastructure in place at the university that allows, like, the Better block, which involves 3 different courses and 2 different academic departments with like 5 different instructors, and they may change year to year. How do you make sure that that keeps going? And by having some sort of a center that, in our case, federally funded, if we weren't federally funded, we couldn't do this. Because then by having that, we've gotten to a point where we go out and we solicit community groups to tell us what projects do you want to work on. So it allows us to work with more community partners as opposed to just public agencies who have the resources. And so that's one thing that has changed. But it's always a little precarious depending on having those resources.
Thank you. Any other comments, or shall we
Marisa?
open up to
Marisa,
the-
I think Marisa has said.
I
I don't
hope
know.
she,
I can't tell.
I
see.
can't
I
tell.
do, I think
Marisa?
I'm trying to understand, are you asking what has externally made a shift?
No, just not this particular question, but you can answer that too. I asked, how has your approach begun to change as you've gone deeper into the issues that you care about most?
So I think I have 2 answers to that. One, as simply a practitioner of the work and a scholar of the work, I have leaned a lot further into advocacy. I don't see advocacy as a bad word. I think it's really important. Somebody sent an email from one government office to another government office talking about a document that Dr. Lisa Bates and I put together. And it was like a really boring academic document that had a bunch of numbers in it. And the person still asked and commented, it seemed a little advocacy-ish. And what did the other person think about it? And we're still not even sure what made them think it was advocacy, but we think it's because we listed some policies at the end of the document that you could go and advocate for to address what these numbers were telling us that were quite terrible. So I think I've just, like, 10 years ago, I'd be like, oh my God, I should see less advocacy. But I'm like, no, like, if that's what advocacy is, cool. That's what I should be doing with my time. Interestingly, on the flip side, as the center's philanthropic and initial university investment has been spent down, we are getting pushed into more of the, like, government can write us a check research. And some of the things that I think are most inventive that we either did or were able to fund came from unrestricted money that I think fulfills the true passion and mission of community engaged research. And so, I'm excited about the government projects we're doing for sure. And I think they're important, but that is going to become our entire life. And so that, I think, that's a pressure that's put on us versus what I think most of us would be preparing to do is the, like, what Jennifer was saying, communities come to us and say, what do you need? And communities might be multiple and broadly put. But we're going to end up in a position where community means what the government wants to pay us to do very quickly.
That issue of whether or not you only work on what the sponsor wants came up a couple of times. So thank you for spelling it out more fully. I think that's a really crucial question of what all the people who do community engagement consider to be essential versus what funders happen to want. And sometimes it overlaps. Sometimes it's the same. And sometimes it's at odds. So do you have thoughts you'd like to answer the thing. It's your turn, audience. We'll have the same problem if there are people on Zoom, because I can't see them. But folks in the audience, what would you like to talk about? What are your questions?
So do you think it's easier to do this kind of work in Portland or harder in Portland than in other cities where you may have worked? Like, in Baltimore or Boston or Cincinnati? Is there something about Portland that makes it easier, that makes it harder, or is it just this broader society in which we live and Portland's just part of it? Can you repeat the question? We're answering it.
Yes,
Someone
you
wanted-
asked it broadly.
I'll-
We're being, you want to repeat the question?
Sure, so the question was, is there something that makes doing this work easier in Portland than elsewhere or harder than Portland than elsewhere? Not quite as elegant as Paula, you get the gist. And probably, I'm imagining all of our answers are a little bit of both. I would say for the type of work, more the applied research where a public agency is asking us to do the work, it's much better. Like there's a lot of cities where the city does not want the university like evaluating what we're doing, and doesn't engage that way. So I think on a lot of transportation stuff, there's a lot of positives that happens in Portland more than elsewhere. And plus there's something interesting going on. There's some cities that aren't doing much interesting work. And so there's no local research to do, right? I think, the negatives aren't really that negative. It's more getting too many requests from potential community partners and not being able to handle it because the most common request we get is, do you have a student who wants to look into this issue for us? And it's like, well, our students like work 3 jobs and, are very busy. And so it's hard to answer all those requests.
Other thoughts?
Well, I've only worked in Portland, so no comparison. But over the years, I think it's gotten the infrastructure, the behind the scenes has allowed us a little bit more conversation with community partners and contracting, and all of that seems, or at least maybe I'm part of the conversation a little bit more than when I was a student. It's not necessarily fast or easy, but it's doable. So I think the folks who help us with those contracting and all that budgeting are as earnest as the folks who'd actually doing the work. Like there's a whole series of people even getting a contract or a budget out the door. And I would say there are places where we can offer to the community or to government funding, state, federal, here's an idea, do you want to fund it? So I think it can go back and forth. I totally hear you, Marisa, about, well, maybe we just have to follow the money, but I don't think that's always the case. If you've got some ideas in the community, it's, in our work with HUD or Department of Education or Center on Violence, the field initiated work is also pretty valuable.
Well, I can't resist answering to you. When I was president at the University of Vermont, HUD still had grants for universities and communities to work together.
Yeah. Vermont
had an Institute for Community Sustainability, and the city of Burlington became the poster child. And so it was as easy as you could ever imagine to get involved. What was different is all the things you've heard today about how the very practice of engagement is taking deeper and more complex shape hadn't happened yet. So we still thought we had to provide research to support others, which is something we still do. But it would be wonderful to take everything we talked about today and take it back to Burlington and see what would have happened.
So I'm gonna jump in just in case I get misrecorded and someone points this out to my government partner, because what Mary said worries me a little bit. I think a lot of what we do for government is great and it's super important. But when that's your only funding, then what government wants you to do or not do, that's it. Right? You can get some good, interesting projects going through community, work with community to take it to the government, build partnerships. And then I was saying, like, there's a subversive moment of like, we have these really strong partnerships with X group. We know that X office is going to fund us to do Y thing. We can work with our group to actually put some other stuff into the project. But that's really different than having in restricted money to say, we've got $10,000 grants to community groups. What do y'all want to do? What do y'all need? That's just a dramatically different positioning than when it's starting with funding from government. Like, that's not community centered, right? Community is when community controls the project, runs the project, thinks through the project. And I mean, again, like, I love our government work. It's going to be some of us our highest impact work, right? Being part of evaluating some of these funding mechanisms and helping hold accountable the way programs are implemented. It's going to produce national findings. It's still not the same thing. And, you know, it's also the idea that I can't build a center infrastructure off of an amazing grant from the Sociological Initiatives Foundation, right? They're going to provide money for a project and that's going to be awesome and great. But the only one who's got the pockets, as I think Jennifer was talking about, to actually stake infrastructure for a center, it's really our federal governments, let alone, you know, trying to cobble stuff together through our local governments. Local government partners, I love you. You're my best friends. OHCS, Joint Office of Homeless Services, Metro, BFFs forever. No shade.
Oh,
I would just jump in quickly to say that I think when we started some of this in Milwaukee, when I was there was some going on, to be sure, but the more we did it, more concentrated and deeper connection, showing the universities about it kept growing. In other words, people got to know you, got a little bit more trust, you got a little more authenticity, and you get to grow. So I think we have a lot of that here. And I think that's a good thing. I'm not sure we've reached all parts of our community. We've been having conversations with affinity groups of color in Portland with the community and some of our own folks. Just think about what's happening in that community: African American, Latinx, Native American, Asian Pacific Islander, and we're doing now some with South Asian and North Africa, things together. So we're thinking about that. And clearly when we have those conversations to some of those groups, they don't really know PSU. We haven't gotten to them yet. They don't see us as a partner yet. They may even have suspicion of us, which is true of any university. So I think part of it is we have to always remember there may be deeper ways we can connect with deeper parts of our community than we have. And the other thing I would say on the other end is I wish the state government more fully appreciated the value of universities of helping to create social change, of knowledge creation, of learning. And we work with them quite a bit. They're very concerned about the education of students. I think that's great. I'm very much for that. It's part of what we do. But sometimes I think this state, compared to other states I've been in, does not appreciate the value that the universities can bring to helping to create change and innovation. It doesn't mean we're the only ones. It doesn't mean we have all the answers, but just to be seen as an asset and maybe some funding to consider that would be interesting. Our Higher Education Coordinating Commission, when asked about funding for research through the state, says that's not in our purview. That's not part of what HEC does. So how do we sort of get supporting research what these folks are doing? How do we get people to appreciate that work? And to Marisa's point, we don't always have to say, we do get grants and content-specific things, but how you invest in universities so they have some capital, some ability, and some resources to be able to take the work that the good people want to do here and support that work. So those are my only thoughts on that.
I have to agree that having worked in state of Washington and Texas, that's really a problem, that the underfunding of and the fact that at Texas, for all the terrible things we can say about Texas, we could reach out to the legislature, and we carried some weight in the work that we did. And it was taken seriously, and we had robust lines of funding, of course, there's oil money, stuff like that. And it's the same at Washington, and I feel like we're having to backfill with other things to make up for that here. So it takes more work to get the work done here due to that, but I think that, maybe we're getting better at it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Other questions from the audience? Yes, ma'am.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I graduated last year and while I was going to the university, I had every intention of going back to Seattle after I graduated. But I found, hopefully thanks to the things that Jennifer did, but if you're a senior citizen who wants to not drive a car, then this area is one of the best places, certainly better than Seattle, to live. Because of the transportation and the way the structure has been made, that I can get to church, I can get to the store, I can do anything I want to do by the transit that is here in the city. And I appreciate everything that the college gave to you.
Thank you. Well, oh, yeah, so it was and I have something to add. So it was a comment from a recent graduate who's decided to stay in the Portland area rather than go up to Seattle, partly because of the accessibility and the ease of getting around, particularly for older adults. And so I have to give also some credit to the Institute on Aging, which is in this college, that has a long history of exactly focusing on age-friendly communities and partners with the city of Portland to become an age-friendly community. I think our graduate is now working for the city, leading up that effort. And I think it's another great example of those partnerships and the impact that this university, and particularly this college,
I'm sorry, what a beautiful statement of impact.
Right.
Just the
there's
kind
no
of thing we're trying to show that made a difference to people, to the vitality of our community, retaining you and your experience and your wonderful contributions to our community, retaining that because of something that the community of the university is part of that. So what a beautiful statement of impact. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Those are things that make my heart warm.
And that's true. Yes, Ethan.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, all of you. It's been a really interesting presentation. So 70-some years ago, when Portland State started, it used the urban mission essentially as a strategy for getting the attention of the key entities it needed to speak to for its very survival. And that was really the chancellor and the legislature. In 70 years, has our sense of who our audience is and how we speak to them changed? And, are we kind of garnering the same strategic value out of being an urban university that we really did for the first 20 or so years of Portland State's history? But now hearing you talk about, well, the state doesn't support research, doesn't support us, blah, blah, blah. I'm thinking, wait a minute, do we still have that same strategic sense of who we are and who we need to speak to?
That's a hard question to describe fully. The basic thing that you're asking, we used our urban identity to help build the initial support for what became Portland State College. Now we're Portland State University in a very different political, social environment. Who's our audience now? In those days, it was the chancellor of the system, it was the legislature. What is it now, Steve?
It's a great, it's a great question. There's been some more mission differentiation since we started that. Now there's there's an information technology university, there is a rural university. I'm not sure that Cache has the same appeal using the other approach. What we're trying to help people understand is you're trying to do some differentiation. If we're an urban university, what does that mean? One of the things that we know that means now is that we are serving the people of a region that's becoming more diverse. Portland State University will be a majority minority institution in 2 years or so. Our incoming classes already are. So we are the engine of social mobility for those groups. We have the urbanness connection allows us to support that, to grow that. It also is huge urban problems now. I mean, the glow of cities and downtowns a little challenged now by other things. And so I think trying to say what that means today in terms of what our value proposition is it definitely being the engine of social mobility, the engine of the future workforce, because most of our students stay here. Do you know the second largest provider of incoming workforce to Intel is Portland State, second only to Arizona State. So we have a big role on that. I think we need to sort of kind of reinvent. We've been trying to reinvent what it means to be an urban university and what that uniqueness means, and hopefully have people understand, yeah, that's worthy of investment because of that.
So 50 years from now, when we gather, well, actually, we will gather. When
Somebody finds this video somewhere.
So, what will that kind of, in your world, that manifestation of being the best urban university for the next 50 years?
Well, I'm only one person in that generation, but I don't mind the question. To me, if we can do Si, you should just come up here. These are long questions. The question is, if we look back in 50 years and we were an effective urban university, what would that look like? What would we be proud of? I would be proud if we found a way to create strong student success across all our groups of students. One of the things we've done in racial injustice and equity work is to disaggregate learning outcomes by students, and they're not equivalent. If you just look at everybody, it's an average. But if we can find the best way to help students with the right educational background, then that may need to have some innovation and the right support services and the right helping them feel engaged and part of the institution. If we could find that and then create that opportunity for people in the best way we could, so that we had very little persistence problem, people graduated. And we had people being successful and people saying, I'm where I am today because of Portland State. Many people say that now, but I'd like to say it to even richer, stronger group of people that are now forming the future of our community. So that's one thing. The other thing I wish we could say even more, but we can say a lot of, we had a problem and Portland State was part of the solution. A problem arose and we called Portland State to come to the table and be part of it. We do a lot of that, but I hope we'll continue and maybe grow that. But other people may have some thoughts on it too.
That is a very good question. I wonder whether people in the audience would like to comment too. What do you imagine will be like 50 years from now? What would make us as much an exemplar as we were in the past and are still in the present? How would you answer that question now? Yes.
I think what the Percy said, especially working with people that don't have a lot of that, Black community, Native community, to help them, like you said, to be able to hang on, to learn, graduate, and then also contribute to the community. But also, I think we all know that artificial intelligence and robots are coming. And we need to prepare our students for that future. They need to get trained in the ways that they can go into the workforce. It's going to be vastly different than it was.
Thank you. Other, oh,
You're on.
a member of our audience made a lovely comment about the fact that we'll be known by these, how we help people develop themselves as human beings, pursue their agenda, and successfully be part of the community. That doesn't capture everything you said, but if you say it again, you still won't get heard on the Zoom, so sorry about that.
Ethan, one more thing I would add on if we're doing well that I think we can do more work on is that every Portland State University graduate goes away with a civic spirit. I was trying to get the wording right. I don't mean a political advocate, but I mean,
Right.
We're it could be, but it doesn't, it isn't, it's a broad thing, but we're working on a pilot project now where we're trying to think of in community-based learning courses, would instructors take a half hour one day to do some reflection on what you're learning about your civic perspective, where you might contribute, what skills you might have. A lot of community-based learning is experiential. You're taking that community-based experience to learn something about what you're learning in your coursework and what you're learning in your profession and you're learning and what you may do in your career, and that's good. But do we have a chance to reflect on that? So that I have this idea that we're going to try to pilot. I hope I'm trying to work on that, where you'd have several reflection points, and then your senior capstone, you'd have a unit in there, which was your reflection on yourself and a commitment to yourself for the future.
Yep.
What have you learned? What are your skills? Where do you want to get involved? What would you like to have more skill in so you could be better involved? And what are your commitment? And then 3 years out, we'll send it back to them and see if they got their mind. But I think we could fine tune and hone that. It's implicit in a lot of our work, but I think that's one thing I think that civic spirit and energy is something that has been kind of drained out of our society a bit, maybe drained out of higher education and even K-12 education. So I would like to just see us do more than that to help people be meaningful parts of their health of their communities, in addition to their careers and their families.
So I'm going to hop in here. I know we had kicked it over to audience, but I'm just going to use a panel privilege here and say a couple more things. I don't agree that we're less poignant or on mission than we were 50 years ago. And so I think it's also maybe not a great framing to say, are we or aren't we? But it's more of the future looking of what do we want to be and what do we want to do? Right? To think about like, what is that impact that we want to see? And I think it's interesting that we keep going back to workforce, because that's certainly not how I think of the university, right? A university can provide a floor and a basis for a long-term career. But I don't think any of us on this panel can claim that we went to university to get training for a job. I mean, probably Sergio, because architects actually go and learn skills to go and make designs happen once they're there for a long time. A lot of us were privileged enough to get jobs based on our undergraduate degrees. But a lot of us, the assumption would be that we went to graduate school to get that training. And so I think it is a question of, are we a place for workforce development training? Are we a place for the advancement of a civic spirit, a civic pride, a learning of how to participate in society and community? And in the case of an open access school, a place that is providing the leveling of a playing field in terms of knowledge, thought, expression. Are we both of those things? And if so, how do we do both of them in a meaningful and sustained way? And I think that to me is one of the questions that we have going forward. And in that sense, like, what does it matter to what matters to our communities? So, you know, one of the things that I think about a lot, and I'm on the Racial Justice Council for the governor, and we've been talking about this in the context of this new funding that's been coming out for workforce development that's going to the community colleges and some of the four-year institutions, is that I know a lot of people from my community think that you have to go to a four-year school to get a job. And they assume if you go to a university, you will get a job. and that you have been trained to enter a career. And so while we talk about, sure, we might be a majority minority institution in a few years, are we becoming that in a way that actually meets the community needs and expectations? And if it doesn't, should we be thinking about doing things differently, either in terms of recruitment or in terms of what we're doing at the university?
To build on that, I'd say, let's play with Steve's idea. The purpose of an education is to get to know yourself well, to begin to understand what strengths, what things you bring to the world. And then I think your third one was how to develop those strengths and create a path forward. That will clearly include the profession you choose, but it will also include your identity as a member of a community, as a friend, as a family member, and for many of our students as parents. So what we're really getting at is the purpose of education is not to learn material. It's to discover the world inside you. And that would be true whether we're an urban institution or a rural institution, indigenous or an HBCU. It just doesn't, or Latinx. It's the goal we all have. There are many students who come to us wanting to be able to get a good job and make their lives better, which is important. But what we can do while they're here is help them open up their own thinking, their own world. And one of the things about community engagement that it's always meant so much to me, and I think to you too, Steve, is the opportunity to make what you know useful, to put what you're learning to a good purpose. And when you do that, we've been successful.
I mean, I kind of want to add to this. I think there was the partial response of Ethan to one of the questions about. I mean, I think there's a political agenda to this also that I think has been lost in a sense that people have lost a sense of, you know, there's no civic education in a sense that what our rights and responsibilities as citizens of a democracy are. And in the process, you see it, you know, kind of like unions struggling to come back and, you know, people not realizing, not just getting training in a job, but what are your rights within that job or what are your responsibilities to others, right? So there's a reciprocal nature to this, which is kind of inherent in service learning, that you're there, but you're respecting somebody's right and opinion just as you are to yours. So, or learning about yours in the process. So I think that we just kind of, I see in America with it kind of so much about, you know, kind of, you know, what is the value of a university education? I think one of the biggest values is to teach you to be good citizens, you know, to know how to work within a democracy and what your rights within that democracy are, and you know, and kind of, you know, become advocates for it, or kind of, I don't want to start processing like, but anyway, but a new religion, university.
Oh dear. Are there other questions? Yes. Okay, Jennifer, you're on.
Hi, as you said, my name is Jennifer Martinez. I'm a grad student in the Public Affairs and Policy program. I'm really interested in this conversation because I kind of was thrown into community engaged research throughout the pandemic, really responding to COVID-19 and its impact on farm workers, also projects on wildfires in Southern Oregon. And, you know, I really see the power in community engaged research. But I really wanted to just frame my question around support for graduate students. I know President Percy mentioned really bringing in and appealing to community organizations from BIPOC communities. I know one of the reasons I was kind of approached to take a part in some of these projects is because of the translation, right? That lived experience I have as a member of a farm worker community, as different memberships and identities that I hold, and so. At the same time, though, we know the status of academia and the status of funding for doctoral students. So I really just wanted to pose the question about what type of funding sources or pipelines does PSU imagine to really foster folks doing this work, graduate students doing this work in a way that really nourishes their praxis and time and investment. One of the things that I've learned in community-based research is that there's a lot of unpaid labor. So really, I just wanted to pose that question and kind of, remind folks about how do graduate students
Did we lose or is that?
The very end got cut off.
Yeah,
But
I think essentially.
Yeah.
So
Oh, I
can answer.
gather the question is, many of our students are active in our community engagement, but they also have real needs to take care of their own lives and need sources of support. I think that's
Well,
the question.
certainly graduate students and increasing undergraduates have been involved in a lot of this work. I think they're involved in every one of the centers you've spoken about. Sometimes they're funded through extramural grants and contracts, sometimes through work in their departments, but I have to admit that our fiscal situation has become tougher in recent years as a result of a period of enrollment decline over several years. That I don't mean that that's not an excuse, it's just the reality. So in terms of pipelines, I'd love to find new ways to fund our graduate students or to get them involved in projects. I don't think I have the answer right now, to be very honest with you. I'd love to find other ways to do that. I hope we're making advantage of all kinds of federal grants and projects where we can do some of that, but I'd love to sit down and think about that. But I don't know that I have any immediate pathway. Just be honest with you that I see that there would be a major infusion of funding, but I sure wish there was, and I'd be willing to think about it. I appreciate calling out that important role that graduate students have played and continue to play.
yeah, I think this ties back to an issue that's come up a few times that Marisa and others have mentioned. That tension between going after the usually federal government, sometimes state government funding, because I know I can get that, I can fund a couple grad students.
Yep.
And just keeping going after that versus some other sources of support that aren't as available, or aren't available at all, that would do more true community engaged efforts, a little more flexibility, fewer strings, etc. It's a challenge, and it's not. I'd say it's a much bigger challenge in Portland State and in the state of Oregon than it is in other states that have more resources for higher ed.
And for the record, the question was about graduate students are very involved, like to be involved, can benefit from involved and engaged research. Is there other pathways or pipelines that we could support and maybe expand? That was the question which we responded to.
Yeah.
So we do know that engaged learning, whether that's in a research project or an engaged class, improves student retention and graduation. So what if we propose some kind of experiment with the legislature that's a sort of social impact fund, where they pay us on the upside to do one of this kind of work, and we demonstrate that means that more of our students graduate and get their degrees. And And, you know, maybe that's a way to, I don't know if they're open to that kind of experimentation. I know that there's a lot of social impact on experiments happening. And there might be some way to sort of monetize benefits. And we don't have it for that.
For the record, I think the question is about a social impact bond. The idea, if indeed engagement is important to student success, and engagement can improve communities, is there a way to create a pilot with the legislature where they would front end some expenditures to expand this work, and then we'd have metrics to show the success and impact of the work.
It's an idea for your CERA, you know, to sort of demonstrate how that could work. And, you know, use a particular class or group of classes, and, you know, show that.
And my response to this is a fantastic idea. I'd love to work with you and love to work with the legislature. The feasibility of that, I can't comment on today, but I think that would be a very interesting project.
Thank you.
I'm not being dismissive. I'm sure
Right.
with all the demands that higher education, but I love that. And I love that.
And it-
Social impact bond. I like that. We'll look into that. Did you make that up? Or I mean, is that
No, it's a thing.
okay? Well, can you send me some information on that? Thank you.
Did you look
As
it up?
maybe-
No, it's a thing.
No, I was going to give you great credit if you want to.
They're using experimental all kinds of things. I, you know, I know some, all kinds of social programs.
Well, I think you've opened up an interesting path to think in fresh ways about how all these different things we've talked about this afternoon connect to each other. They're no longer separate things. So we have very little time left, so I can't resist saying before we end, I want to tell you what I heard from all the panelists about how community engagement is changing and see if I missed something. So the first, and I'm not going to say who said what, largely because I didn't write that part down. So the very logic, protocols, and practices in our professions as well as our interactions are changing. We have new forms of collaboration. Where one that I thought about before, and I remember it was Mary said this one, connecting our urban areas to other parts of the state, partly to figure out we can support each other. What can we teach each other? And so being an urban university has a commitment to a larger agenda at the same time. The issue of different access to each other and all the things we've learned from the pandemic. The role of technology itself and how it can expand who we interact with, how we interact with them. The various senses of what good evidence is. How do we decide what success means for a project? What kinds of evidence would we collect? How would we learn from it? Knowledge that has real meaning to the community can be generated by any of us. And as I've listened to this and really thought through where we've been in this past couple of hours, the world is opening up to us in ways that are extraordinary. And you've heard from our panel wonderful examples what that means, what difference it can make to our students, our colleagues, and the faculty and staff, and to the communities. We've heard from Steve the real significance of the deep commitment we have to racial justice and equity, what that will mean for our future, and how we will express it in our daily work. Thank you. I know I is gonna close our session, but I can't resist thanking you for making it possible for us to have a conversation like this. It will matter. It will have consequences. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judith.
Thanks very, very much to the panel. Very stimulating discussion. Thanks to Dean's Office staff, Kaya Mendoza, Erin Sutherland, Sarah Violante, Jonathan Wolf for producing the event. Steve mentioned that we got a rural university in Oregon now. That's Eastern Oregon University. A panel under development. I hope we'll be there with it in November. We'll be bridging the urban-rural divide, PSU and Eastern Oregon University colleagues, talking about experiences we've had going back and forth and what that might look like in the future. Next week's panel, which is very closely related to the kinds of things we've been talking about here today, institutional collaboration, PSU and its public, private, and civic sector partners, moderated by Kevin Mealy, Vice President for University Relations, including Michael Jordan, Chief Administrative Officer of the City of Portland, Fletcher Bedoin, our own Director of the Institute for Sustainable Solutions, Sushila Jayapal, Multnomah County Commissioner, and Sarah Salzberg, Director of our Center for Public Service. Please attend. Thank you all very much, both in person and Zooming in. Best wishes. Thank you.
Is Easter University?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
This is fun.
Fun. Oh, my goodness.